Welcome back to Racing Rundown's Breeders' Cup Preview Series. I'm Matt Code. This video, we're going to be taking a look at Race 5 from Keeneland this Saturday, and it is the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. Before we talk about each horse, I do want to talk a little bit about the configuration of this race. Being a mile and a 16th racetrack, Keeneland is sort of an ill fit to hold 1 mile dirt races. So there's going to be this incredibly short run into the first turn, followed by a short stretch run to Keeneland's first finish line. Given how much of this race is going to be run around the turns, I think there's going to be a real premium on saving ground in here, and it could be a real disadvantage for horses that are posted on the outside. But there is a lot of speed in here. But this configuration could be pretty tough on the closers, who are going to have to run down the leaders very quickly. With that being said, we'll take a look at the field of 11, beginning with number 1, Slow Down Andy. He comes in off a third place finish in the Awesome Again, where he posted a career best 96 Buyer. He has some speed, and he might be able to work out an okay trip from the rail in here, but I'm concerned that he hasn't shown the ability to hit the type of speed figures that you really need to be able to win in here, but he's going to be a huge price. 2 is Simplification. He's 15-1 on the morning line, coming out of a 4th place finish in the Pennsylvania Derby, where he prompted a pretty sharp pace and was just nailed for 3rd by Cyberknife late. He had a career best 98 Buyer speed figure in that race, and his trip was much more taxing than the one Cyberknife got. I think it's possible that he's a steadily improving son and not this time. He could get a pretty good trip in here. He should be able to save quite a bit of ground down on the rail. I don't necessarily love him on the win end, but I won't be surprised if he hits the board at a big price. 3 is Chad Brown's Pipeline. He's a 4-year-old Speightstown colt, and he ran awfully well in Saratoga's Forgo, where he pressed Jackie's Warrior and wound up 3rd behind him and Cody's Wish. He ran a 105 Buyer in that race and passed his 106 from Aqueduct back in April. So he has 2 races that are legitimately fast, but they both came under pretty good circumstances on the lead. I had a pretty hard time knowing what to do with him in here. He's going to be forwardly placed, and he's going to be a price. If he can get to his good races, he's got a shot in here, but they're not all that consistent on his page. So he's one of the tougher calls in here, in my opinion. Number 4 is Law Professor. He's 20-1 on the morning line. He comes in off a solid second. Life is Good in the Woodward, and he gave that one a bit of a scare at points in there. The best he's ever run is that 95 that he ran in the Woodward, which leaves him some work to do in here. The mile should be fine for him, but I just question the quality of him, and this is a pretty tough field. 5 is Gunite. He's 7-2 for Tyler Gaffley and Steve Asmussen. Stretches out to the mile off a victory in the 7 furlong Perryville at this track 2 weeks ago. He ran a 106 in that Perryville, and he's now hit triple digits in 4 consecutive starts. From a trip standpoint, he figures to be one of many that want to be forwardly placed in here, but his 106 Buyer stands up pretty well and makes him a legitimate contender. I don't love him in here, but he's one that I think you can include. If he can stretch out okay, he's certainly a live contender. 6 is Laurel River for Irad Ortiz and Bob Baffert. He's 9-2, coming in off a very impressive win in the 7 furlong Pat O'Brien at Del Mar, where he earned a 101 Buyer speed figure. He had a pretty good trip in there, but he ran legitimately fast. Prior to that, he ran awfully well in winning an allowance race at Del Mar, where he ran a 97. I'm a little concerned with him that he'll be caught up in the hot pace in here, but with the short stretch, it might not be that big of a deal. There's also the possibility that Irad's just going to take him a little bit off the pace, but that isn't really what Baffert does. But he seems to be a rapidly improving 4-year-old for a barn that stretches out with the best of them. So I think you definitely have to include him, because I'm not going to be a bit surprised if he takes another big step forward in this spot. 7 is Cody's Wish. Junior Alvarado, Bill Mott, he's the 5-2 morning line favorite, and he's been quietly running legitimately fast races this year. And then he burst onto the scene with his impressive win in the Forgo, where he ran down Jackie's Warrior and posted a 112 Buyer speed figure. He seems to have gotten pretty good this year, and he could work out a nice trip in behind the speed in here, but in front of the deeper closers. The caveat to that is, though, he could lose some ground on the turns, and that's not going to be to his advantage in here. But if he runs back to that 112 Buyer in here, this field could be in a lot of trouble. 8 is Informative for Uriah St. Louis. He figures to be probably the longest shot in this field, but he's coming off a distant 4th in the Woodward. He does have that 97 Buyer from the Islin on his page, but the issue is that race appears to be a total outlier for him. So I have a hard time liking him, even though Uriah St. Louis did pop with one at a big price before in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. The 9 is the 3-year-old Cyberknife, Brad Cox, Florent Giroux. He's coming in off a third in the Pennsylvania Derby where he ran a 98 buyer, but he got a pretty good trip there, collapsing, rating off the pace and capitalizing on what was a pace collapse. For the Pennsylvania Derby, he ran 2 legitimately fast races, a 105 while finishing second in the Travers and a 102 and winning the Haskell. So he's gotten pretty good trips in his last 3, but if he could build on that 105, he'd be a real major player in here. My concern with him is the post, though. He's the type of horse who usually just wants to sit off the pace, but that trip could get him caught real wide in here and losing a ton of ground. I think they're going to end up taking him off the pace a little bit more than usual, but that presents its own set of issues because he's going to have to close down these leaders in a very short time. 10 is Senor Buscador at 12-1, comes in off a nice win in the ACAC where he ran a 98, validating the 99 that he earned running third in the Pat O'Brien. He's one that typically wants to sit a few lengths off the pace and make a big run turning for home, but like Cyberknife, he could be compromised by this outside post, and he's going to have to be much the best to really make any impact in here if he loses the kind of ground that he could lose from the 10. A horse that I think could hit the board at a price is in the 11-3 Technique. He exits that same ACAC, but he was pretty disappointing in there, running third with a 90 buyer speed figure. But 2 back, he was second in the Hanshin, where he buyered a 102, and he gave the impression of a horse that was really taking a step forward. His 90 buyer in the ACAC is really a return to his prior form, which leaves him a lot to do, but he's a deep closer, and if the pace totally collapses in here, he's got a shot to make a bit of an impact and hit the board. Ultimately, though, I'm going to go to Cody's Wish as my top pick in here, and I hate to be picking the morning line favorite in here, but I think you could see the top 4 prices, the top 4 choices really be bet pretty evenly, so I'm a little more willing to do it. I think this is pretty wide open, and in multi-race sequences, I want to include Cody's Wish, while also using Laurel River, Cyberknife, and Gunite. Perhaps upgrading Cyberknife just a little bit above the other 2, just considering that he might be able to capitalize on a hot pace. Finally, I do want to use Pipeline and maybe Simplification on tickets where I'm going to go a little shallower in other legs. Again, I think Simplification is an interesting candidate to size up the try at a price. At an even bigger price, I would like to include 3 Technique, and again, the aforementioned Pipeline. Overall, this is a competitive rendition of the Dirt Mile with a lot of ways to go. That'll do it for this preview. Stay tuned to Racing Rundown on YouTube for previews of all 14 Breeders' Cup races this weekend, and be sure to check out the Racing Rundown podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, good luck if you're playing the races.